I shoved the last camera into my bag and pulled out my phone. 11 missed calls from the city's parking enforcement office. My chest tightened even before I opened the message. The vehicle has been towed from the hotel's temporary loading zone. Please retrieve it within 24 hours to avoid additional charges. Perfect. Painfully perfect. I had been so focused on the corporate event shoot that I completely lost track of time. The hotel manager had warned me clearly that the temporary zone allowed only 30 minutes, and I had left my car there for 3 hours. Freelance photography never paid much to begin with, certainly not enough to cover stupid mistakes like this. Lily tugged on my coat sleeve, her little face scrunched with exhaustion. "Mommy, I'm hungry." "I know, sweetheart. We'll find something to eat soon." I tried to keep my voice soft, though my heart felt unbearably heavy. Outside the hotel's glass doors in downtown Chicago, the rain was coming, down in sheets. Not the gentle autumn drizzle we walked through earlier, but a white curtain rain, a pounding torrent as if someone had tipped an entire lake over the city. The kind of rain that soaks you through in seconds and drives every cab driver off the streets. I opened my wallet. After paying the overdue electric bill and the late fee at Lily's preschool, I had exactly $43 left. The tow fee alone was $200. Add storage, fines for improper parking, and I couldn't even bring myself to calculate the rest. And the next payment from my client might take days, maybe weeks if their accounting department stalled again the way it always did. Lily stood pressed against my leg, rainwater dampening her tiny pant cuffs, her soft brown hair already clinging to her forehead. She had sat quietly for hours in the corner as I worked, coloring in the book I'd brought from home. She was always patient, too patient for a 5-year-old who should have been in her pajamas. By now, already tucked into bed, not shivering in a hotel lobby at 9 on a weeknight. "Let's find somewhere dry to wait," I said, trying to sound certain. The rain would stop soon. It had to. But the moment I said it, I glanced at my phone. The weather app warned the storm would last at least 2 more hours. The cold air cut straight through my thin jacket. I lifted Lily into my arms, her little hands icy as she wrapped them around my neck. Across the street, a corner cafe still glowed with warm light. The kind of place with a marble bar, $12 lattes, and patrons in expensive coats pretending the world outside didn't exist. I never stepped into places like that. But Lily was shaking, and I needed somewhere to call for help, someone, anyone. When I pushed open the heavy door, warmth and the rich scent of roasted coffee swept over me, loosening my shoulders in an instant. The cafe was packed, every table taken. Lily gripped my hand tighter, her eyes lost in the brand, unfamiliar buzz. I scanned the room, desperate. At the back, one table looked empty. But no, a man sat there alone. Dark coat, slightly curled black hair, eyes quietly observing the room. His gaze paused on me, and the next words that left my mouth would set everything else in motion. "May I sit here? If you're still listening and something in this story has touched a place inside you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, like and share this video, so we can keep bringing you heartfelt stories every day. And if you don't mind, tell me, where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and let us know where in the world this story has reached. We treasure every single word you share." The man looked up when I spoke, his eyes lingering on Lily before returning to mine. He didn't answer right away, just tilted his head slightly, one brow raised as if weighing something. I braced myself for rejection, ready to turn away, but then he gave a small nod, his voice, low and firm. "Sit. But you're not leaving anytime soon." I didn't have time to grasp what he meant. Lily tugged at my hand, pleading silently for rest. I pulled out the chair, lifted her onto my lap, and became acutely aware of how soaked and drained I was. The man didn't say another word. He simply raised a hand to the server. Less than a minute later, a hot cocoa and a small pastry appeared on the table, placed gently before Lily. I turned toward him, ready to refuse, because I knew I couldn't afford anything here. But he gave a quiet shake of his head, his eyes never leaving Lily as she broke off a small piece of pastry. Hesitating before tasting it, his voice came steady and deep. "How old is she?" "5. I answered softly, not intending to say more. He nodded. I kept my arms wrapped around Lily. Her trembling had eased, but I could feel myself growing more uneasy. This cafe, this man, the sharp intensity of his gaze. He didn't look like someone who should, blend into a crowd. I glanced at him again. A tailored dark suit, an expensive watch, a composure too deliberate for someone sitting alone at 9:30 at night. He wasn't trying to seem approachable, yet there was something magnetically controlled about him, as if the entire room unconsciously shifted to match his breath. He took a sip of espresso, then studied me once more. "What do you do?" I hesitated, then replied. "Photography. Freelance. I just finished shooting an event at the hotel across the street, and my car got towed." He nodded, unsurprised. My voice sounded weightless, as though even I no longer believed my work amounted to much. He leaned forward, forearm resting on the table, eyes fixed on me. "How much do you need to get your car back?" I froze. I hadn't come here to ask for money. All I wanted was a dry place for my daughter. "I know," he said calmly. "I'm not offering out of pity. I'm asking because I need a photographer. This week," my eyes widened, but he continued before I could speak. "My mother is turning 65. A private gathering. Important. I need someone to capture it, not the staged kind of photography, but someone who can see the real moments. The shoulder touches, the glances, the things nobody notices." I blinked, still trying to process his words. "I don't have a studio. I only work outdoors, at events. I saw how you held your daughter," he said, "and I know that's the kind of person I need." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a textured business card, printed with the name Vincent Moretti. No address, just a phone number. He placed it on the table, his gaze unwavering. "Take it. I'll pay half up front if you accept." I swallowed hard. Every instinct inside me lit up like a warning siren. No one offered work this way. No one made propositions like this to a stranger in a late-night storm. But his eyes weren't pleading. They weren't trying to convince or rush me. They were simply certain. I looked at Lily, warm now, sipping her cocoa, the first smile of the entire day blooming gently on her lips. And I knew, whatever this turned into, I couldn't walk away from this chance. I held the business card as if it might vanish if I didn't clutch it tightly. Vincent Moretti. The name felt both strange and familiar, as though I had heard it somewhere before, on a newspaper page or whispered behind the scenes of an event. I didn't say anything, and I didn't need to. He gave a small nod as if my answer had already been spoken, then looked at Lily with a softened gaze. I don't know how long I sat in that cafe. All I remember is that when I finally stood up, the rain had eased and Lily had fallen asleep in my arms. I was still fumbling to figure out how to get her home when a black car rolled up to the window. Vincent signaled for the driver to open the door, then turned to me. "Marcus will take you both home, safely." I didn't have time to refuse. The decision had already been made. In the car, I held Lily and looked at Vincent through the fogged window. He didn't smile, didn't wave, simply stood there like a statue beneath the streetlights. The business card in my hand felt warmer, damp from my palm. The next morning, while Lily was still asleep, I took my phone and dialed the number. A gentle female voice answered, as if she had been waiting. "Miss Parker, correct? Mr. Moretti instructed us that if you agree, the car will pick you up tomorrow afternoon. Everything will be prepared." I barely managed to ask, "Prepared what?" when she added, with calm precision, "You won't need to bring anything except your camera. Wardrobe will be provided. A professional working space. The event will be held in Lake Forest, at the family residence. And, by the way, the deposit has already been transferred." My hands trembled as I opened my email and saw the bank notification. $500 had been deposited into my account with a brief note, "For trust." I had never been paid up front for any job, and never had a job felt so much like a test of faith. I spent the entire morning pacing around my small apartment, thoughts spinning in a relentless circle. I should refuse. I should return the money and say no. But I couldn't deny the way Vincent had looked at me last night, the quiet way he had cared for Lily without asking questions. It made me feel as though he had seen something in me, something I hadn't realized was visible. And I was so tired of turning down every chance just because fear had become my habit. I didn't want Lily to grow up in a world where her mother avoided anything good simply because the past had taught her that every good thing came with a price. The next afternoon, right on time, the black car returned. Marcus, the tall, solemn man I had seen the night before, opened the door and bowed slightly, as if we were honored guests. During the nearly hour-long drive, my heart beat so hard I could feel it in my throat. Lily, meanwhile, looked out the window with delight, watching the houses drift by, the afternoon sunlight brushing her cheeks, and I told myself that whatever awaited us, as long as she was safe, I would face it. When the car turned into a stone-paved road leading to a sprawling estate hidden behind towering iron gates and meticulously trimmed greenery, I knew I had stepped into a different world entirely. A world where invitations were never just about work. A world where every gaze followed you from the moment you crossed the first gate. As the car slowed to a stop before the mansion, it took me several seconds to accept this was where I would be working. The ornate black iron gates had opened without a sound, revealing a straight cobblestone path lined with perfectly trimmed evergreens, disciplined as soldiers in formation. Even the air felt different, thick, still, like a curtain drawn around the place. Lily pressed, her face to the window, wide-eyed. "Whose house is this, Mommy? Is it a castle?" I couldn't answer. I simply stroked her hair. Marcus drove past a courtyard garden, where lavender bushes arched in careful curves, dotted with old stone statues veiled in moss. The mansion looked like something pulled from an old European film. 3 stories of pale gray stone, a dark tiled roof, tall arched windows catching the fading light. Wide stone steps led to the main entrance where 2 men in black suits stood waiting. When Marcus opened the door for us to step out, I instinctively tightened my grip on Lily's hand. No one spoke. They simply bowed slightly and gestured for us to follow. The wooden doors opened, and I stepped into a world completely unlike my own. The foyer was so large it could have swallowed my entire apartment. The ceiling rose nearly 20 feet high, with crystal chandeliers cascading from the vaulted beams. The air carried the scent of old oak and expensive perfume. Large oil paintings hung in gilded frames, each one a story frozen in color. At the end of the hall stood a woman in a black silk dress, her silver hair twisted into a tight bun. There was something about her posture, an authority that didn't demand obedience but made you instinctively offer it. Lucia Moretti, Vincent's mother. When I approached, she didn't smile. She simply looked at Lily, and something in her eyes softened, as if touched by an old ache. "How old is the child?" she asked, her faint Italian accent turning the words into a gentle breeze. 5, I answered, trying to remain steady. She nodded, her lips pressing together briefly before she turned back to me. Her eyes tell stories. Capturing that is an art. Vincent appeared at the top of the staircase at that moment. Today he was dressed more simply, just a white shirt and dark trousers, but the way he moved, unhurried and confident, made the entire house seem to pause. His gaze went to Lily first, then, to me, an unspoken greeting. "Everything is ready," he said. I brushed Lily's hair and asked if she was tired. She shook her head, still staring at a stone angel sculpture nearby. Lucia spoke again. "Let her play with Rosa, the housekeeper's daughter. You may follow Marcus to view the workspace." I hesitated, but Vincent's quiet look steadied me. I didn't understand the trust I felt, but something in his eyes made me feel less alone. Marcus led me down a long corridor, the polished wooden floors reflecting the light like water. Every door we passed opened into another world. A music room with an antique piano, a library with hundreds of leather-bound books, a glass-walled dining room overlooking a still lake. When we reached what they called the temporary studio, I couldn't believe my eyes. Perfect light, professional equipment, everything arranged as though I were some renowned photographer invited to shoot a major campaign. I stood there silently for a few seconds, a strange feeling rising in my chest. It was like stepping into someone else's dream, a dream that didn't belong to me, yet somehow was holding its hand out for me to enter. And I knew nothing would be the same after this. I was still overwhelmed when Marcus signaled for me to return to the main room. As we walked through the marble corridors beneath soft golden light, my mind swirled in a daze. Back in the sitting area, I found Lily perched on a large red velvet armchair beside a little girl about 6 with golden curls and bright brown eyes. Rosa was giggling, showing Lily glittery stickers in a storybook. In the quiet of that moment, Lucia Moretti remained seated on a long chaise near the window, her hands resting on the arm, her gaze never leaving Lily. Something in that look made me pause. It wasn't the usual scrutiny the wealthy reserved for outsiders. It was something deeper, something like grief brushing against hope. I slowed my steps, trying to keep my breath even as Lucia turned toward me. She gestured to the chair opposite her, her eyes seeming to read through every layer of me. "She's a friendly child," she said softly, her voice hushed but still sharp. "Lily is a good girl. She's used to adapting quickly." I tried to keep my voice steady. Lucia nodded, her gaze drifting back to Lily. "She reminds me of someone. A little girl who once sat in that exact spot, with the same soft brown hair and the same way of looking at people, as though she saw more than she should." I didn't speak, unsure whether to ask or simply listen. Lucia sensed it. She turned slightly, looking directly at me. "Dominic's daughter, Sophia, my first grandchild. She passed away 2 years ago. In an accident." My throat tightened. I wasn't sure if it was her grief or something hollow blooming inside my own chest. Lily ran to me then, resting her head against my shoulder the way she always did when strangers watched me too closely. Lucia leaned forward, her voice lowering. "You don't need to be afraid. This is a safe place. Vincent doesn't choose people at random. If he brought you and the child here, he must have seen something particular." I didn't know how to respond. Maybe it was something particular. Maybe it was timing. But her gentle tone didn't make me feel examined, it made me feel invited, as if I'd been given a chance to prove something even I hadn't named yet. She rose and walked toward Lily, bending slightly to place her hand on my daughter's head. Her hand was thin, dotted with age, but tender in a way that surprised me. Lily looked up at her and smiled, bright and unguarded. Lucia didn't smile back, but her eyes glistened. "I would like you to take a photograph of me with Lily, just the two of us. In the back garden, under the maple tree. Vincent knows the place." Her voice was calm, steady, as though she had thought about this long before I arrived. I nodded, unable to say more. Not out of fear, but because something fragile had formed between us, a quiet thread stretching from loss to possibility, from old memories to something unnamed and new. When she left the room, I held Lily closer, my thoughts trembling. I had entered this house for a job, but perhaps things were already moving far beyond a photography assignment. And perhaps the way Lucia Moretti looked at Lily was the first sign of the secrets I was nowhere near ready to face. The party took place the next afternoon beneath the gentle blue of an October sky. The garden behind the mansion had been transformed into something breathtaking, with dozens of round tables draped in white cloth, arrangements of white roses intertwined with pale peonies, set carefully inside antique crystal vases, and sunlight filtering through the branches of maples blazing in shades of gold and red. I stood still for a moment before beginning, letting my eyes take in every detail, searching for the first perfect angle. The air carried an elegance that wasn't ostentatious. Everything was arranged with such delicate precision that it felt as though every crystal glass and folded napkin had its own role in a quiet symphony. Vincent appeared in a dark suit, his tie perfectly knotted, not a wrinkle in sight. He stood beside his mother, Lucia, who wore a deep sapphire silk gown, her hair pinned high, her expression radiant with authority yet touched by introspection. Lily sat with Rosa at a table near the lavender bushes, the two girls bent over a puzzle. Lucia's gaze drifted toward them every so often, lingering longer on Lily, as if she were reaching for something that had slipped out of her grasp long ago. I began my work, the camera feeling like an extension of my hands. I didn't shoot like a typical event photographer, rushing from group to group trying to catch every toast and every stage smile. I moved slowly, observing, a father's eyes as he watched his young daughter twirl in the afternoon light, an elderly mother's hand resting on her son's shoulder as they spoke softly together, the faint tightening of fingers between an elderly couple as they quietly took their seats. Those were the moments I believed Vincent wanted me to keep. While turning to catch a backlit shot that would soften the halo around Lucia's hair, I felt Vincent's eyes on me. Not the curious or doubtful look the other guests had given me earlier, but the kind of gaze someone uses when they're watching the rhythm you create inside their world. I dipped my head slightly in a quiet greeting and continued. When Lucia rose and walked toward Lily, I lifted my camera immediately. The moment she bent down and placed her hand gently on my daughter's shoulder, the last rays of the day cast a thin halo of light around them. I held my breath and pressed the shutter. In that instant, time slowed. No one smiled, no one posed. Just a seasoned woman and an innocent child standing together in a garden heavy with unspoken memories. I knew it would be the most important photograph of the day. After the party, when everyone moved inside to prepare for the evening dinner, Vincent approached me. He didn't offer pleasantries or comments. He simply looked at the camera hanging around my neck and said, "You see what others overlook." Before I could respond, he added, "Don't leave after you send the photos. I want you to review them with me, one by one." I nodded, surprised. I had never had a client ask to go through the photos alongside me. Vincent turned away then, walking slowly toward his mother. Lucia glanced at him, and their eyes met for a brief moment in which I felt something unsaid pass between them, a kind of agreement, or perhaps the quiet understanding of people who communicate through silence. As I packed up my equipment, my thoughts tangled. I had done this work hundreds of times, at hundreds of different gatherings, but never had I felt I was truly capturing something so weighty. It wasn't just about preserving moments, it was about holding on to something that was on the verge of changing. And I knew that today, in some small way, I had left my mark on this world, perhaps through a single photograph, a photograph that might change everything. I was in the temporary workspace Vincent had arranged, carefully reviewing each image from Lucia's birthday celebration. On my laptop screen, the moments unfolded like vivid fragments of memory, from Lucia's tender tilt of the head as she watched Lily, to the complicated glances exchanged between the members of the Moretti family. I was so absorbed that I didn't hear anyone enter until a voice cut through the air behind me, dry and sharp as a blade. "Who are you?" I turned. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, his salt and pepper hair cut short, his black suit fitted like it had been tailored just for him, his gray eyes clouded like a London fog. Dominic Moretti. I recognized him instantly. Vincent's older brother, Lucia's eldest son, the one I had not yet seen since arriving. I stood, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm Emily Parker. Vincent invited me to photograph the family event." Dominic stepped closer, his gaze so cold it felt as though it could peel away my skin and expose whatever secrets I carried. Vincent has a habit of bringing strangers into the house without warning. I didn't respond, unsure what might make the tension ease instead of intensify. His eyes flicked toward the laptop screen, displaying the photo of Lily and Lucia. His expression darkened. Does he truly think that bringing a child here will soften my mother again? I blinked, not fully understanding, but something unpolished had slipped out beneath the family's flawless exterior. Dominic let out a low, humorless laugh. Perhaps he's forgotten that the smallest, most harmless things are the ones that cause the worst consequences, just like Sophia. "Do you know who Sophia is, photographer?" I gave a slight nod, my heartbeat quickening. Dominic took another step forward, now only a few feet from me. "She was my daughter, my mother's first grandchild, and the one who turned everything upside down by loving the wrong person." I didn't know where he was leading, but the air in the room had thickened, heavier than a summer storm. He continued, his voice low but each word striking like a drumbeat. "I don't care where you came from or what Vincent told you. This is my home. And I don't want to see my son playing with a child whose background I know nothing about." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught. There was something in his tone that wasn't anger alone. It was fear. A fracture from a past everyone here was trying to bury. Dominic looked at me one last time, his stare still unyielding. "You have no idea what you've stepped into." Then he turned and walked out, the door slamming behind him like a warning. I stood frozen for a long moment, my chest tightening. Everything that had seemed flawless about the Moretti family, from the ancient stone walls to the dignified gatherings, now revealed cracks running deep beneath the surface. And I was beginning to understand that perhaps my presence here wasn't just about the photographs. Vincent wasn't the only one with a reason to pull me into this world. And Dominic, his eyes when he looked at Lily made me shiver, not out of hatred, but because in that brief moment, I saw the shadow of a father who had lost a child. And what he feared most was seeing something far too familiar take shape again in the small, fragile form of my daughter. That night, I couldn't sleep. The guest room reserved for Lily and me was on the second floor, its windows overlooking the garden where the warm glow of string lights along the trellis made everything appear hazy, like an unfinished oil painting suspended in the dark. Lily had fallen fast asleep, her small arms curled tightly around the stuffed bear Rosa had given her, but I couldn't close my eyes. Dominic's words echoed in my head, a whisper sharp enough to unsettle every corner of my thoughts. "You have no idea what you've stepped into." In the quiet of the late night, I opened my laptop and searched for the name Sophia Moretti. It wasn't hard to find, though every piece of information carried that restrained, polished tone, typical of powerful families. She was Dominic's daughter, born when he was still very young, a student at a prestigious East Coast art school, gifted in painting and once invited to take part in a group exhibition in New York. The few photos still circulating showed a girl with deep, soulful eyes and long, curled hair. She looked almost exactly like a young Lucia, but at 20, Sophia died. The official cause was a car accident on her way home after an exhibition. The car had lost control, crashed into a bridge rail, and plunged into a river. No signs of pursuit, no substances in her blood. A quiet death wrapped up in a private family funeral, without further investigation. I shut the laptop, but the questions churned inside me. Why did Dominic speak of it like a wound that never healed? And why did the sight of Lily provoke such anger in him? The next morning, I brought the memory card to the workspace, just as Vincent had asked. The room was on the ground floor, its windows opening onto a narrow stone path leading to the lake. Vincent sat beside the large wooden desk, sleeves rolled up, reviewing the photographs from the party one by one. When I entered, he didn't look up right away. He paused on a single image. It was the one where Lucia rested her hand on Lily's shoulder. He enlarged the photo before turning toward me. "Did you know my mother didn't speak to Dominic for 2 years?" I shook my head, my chest tightening. Vincent continued, his voice even but not cold. "After Sophia's death, my mother was hollow. Dominic blamed the family, and she blamed herself. But the one truly responsible, the one who dragged Sophia into that spiral, was her lover." I swallowed. "Who?" "A drug trafficker connected to the Russian Mafia. Sophia hid everything. We only learned the truth after she died." Vincent looked directly at me. Dominic swore he would never allow another child in this family to be pulled into that world. So when he saw Lily, that was his reaction. I sat down, letting out a slow breath. Did she have a child with him?" Vincent shook his head. "No, but my mother has always believed that if Sophia had lived, perhaps she would have changed. She would have cut ties, started over. When she looks at Lily, I think she sees what Sophia never had the chance to become." I stared at the screen. Lily was smiling, her brown hair glowing under the sunlight. The image held a purity so sharp it ached. Vincent spoke softly. "You're nothing like Sophia, but you carry a piece of what we lost." I didn't know what he meant. A kind of bravery, perhaps, or sacrifice, or simply the way I looked at my daughter. But in that moment, I understood one thing. I was no longer an outsider. I had stepped, unknowingly, into an old, unhealed fracture, a story left unfinished within a family shaped by both power and grief. And somehow, I had become the one holding the only tool capable of telling it, my photographs. The days following the birthday slipped by in a quiet, strangely warm rhythm. I no longer felt like a stranger. Lucia occasionally invited me for morning tea in the reading room, its windows overlooking the lavender garden. Rosa and Lily became inseparable, like twin sisters tied together by some gentle fate. Lily learned the names of the plants in the garden, painted beside Lucia, and always beamed whenever she spotted Vincent at the end of the hallway. Vincent never said much, but he was always there, when needed. On afternoons when I worked in the temporary studio, he would pass by at the exact moment Lily tried on a new dress or tilted her head to study the way the light fell on a wall. He never intruded, never sought attention, but the way he watched her, the way he stored each small moment, told me something was changing without needing to be spoken. One evening, light rain tapping softly against the windows, I stood in the auxiliary kitchen preparing a small meal for Lily, who had barely touched dinner. Vincent came in, his sleeves rolled up, holding a damp towel as if he'd just come in from the garden. He saw me, set the towel aside, washed his hands, and without asking, took a small bowl and began helping me cut fruit. I froze for a second, surprised not by the gesture but by how natural it felt, how effortless, how familiar. No one gave orders, no one asked permission. It unfolded in quiet harmony, gently, almost tenderly. Lily burst in, clutching her cloth doll, her eyes lighting up at the sight of Vincent. She climbed into the chair beside him without hesitation, whispering something that made him laugh. For the first time, I heard Vincent laugh aloud, a real laugh, Not a polite curve of the lips, but a sound that softened his whole face. "She wants banana with peanut butter," he translated for me, still smiling. I looked at her, then at him. The two of them, in that moment, felt like pieces that had once been lost now finding their way back into place. I finished cleaning up and stood at the kitchen doorway, watching Vincent feed Lily small pieces of fruit, his hand steady, his gaze gentle as though what he was doing was the most natural thing in the world. No one mentioned the past. No one asked about the future, but I could see the distance between us shrinking day by day. One afternoon, while I was adjusting prints in the library, Lucia entered and quietly settled into the chair opposite me. Her gaze was no longer sharp, as it had been the face's. A first time we met, it had softened. "Vincent hasn't spent this much time with anyone since Sophia died," she said. "He seems reserved, but once he lets someone into his world, it is not easy for them to leave." I said nothing, unsure of what response could possibly fit. Lucia placed her hand on a framed picture of Lily and Rosa laughing among the flowers. "I don't know what your intentions are, but if there is anything worth beginning again for, it is moments like these." I nodded just slightly, but something in my chest tightened. Not from fear, but from the knowledge that every choice from here on carried more weight than before. I was no longer just a freelance photographer shooting events to pay rent. I was someone standing inside a family stitched with old wounds and complex histories, and I had brought Lily with me. Lily, a small flicker of light inside a house long accustomed to shadows. Vincent still hadn't said anything to me about what he felt, but every gesture, every look he gave Lily, every moment he quietly positioned himself at the edges of our day-to-day life was an answer far clearer than any confession. And maybe, just maybe, for the first time in many years, I found myself wondering whether this place could be home. That morning was an ordinary one. The sky, a gentle blue, sunlight filtering through the maple leaves in the garden, creating a peaceful stillness that made it feel as though everything in the world was precisely where it was meant to be. Lily and I ate breakfast in the greenhouse behind the mansion, where Rosa had arranged a few cookies she'd proudly baked herself. Lily laughed as she played, her cheeks flushed pink, her tiny hands twirling her familiar cloth doll. Vincent had left early to meet a business partner whose name I didn't know, and Lucia was in the tea room receiving an elderly guest from Italy. I took the chance to adjust some of the new photographs, while Lily and Rosa asked permission to play, in the garden. 2 guards followed, as always. I nodded, my eyes still fixed on the laptop screen. Moments later, I heard the dogs barking viciously near the side gate. Instinct jolted through me, but I forced myself to believe it was only a squirrel or someone dropping something. Then Marcus burst in, pale as chalk. "Emily, where's Lily?" I shot up from my seat, my heart seizing. "She's in the garden, with Rosa." He didn't say another word. He whipped out his phone and barked into it, his voice tight as wire. "Lock every gate. Check all cameras." I ran outside, my pulse pounding so hard it hurt. The garden was empty. Lily was gone. Only Rosa remained, sobbing beside the stone fountain, her small hand trembling as she pointed toward the western fence. They took her. A black car. They pushed her in and drove away. I dropped to my knees beside Rosa, gripping her shoulders, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Who? Did they say anything?" She shook, her head, tears streaming. All she remembered was 2 masked men in black. Everything after that dissolved into chaos. The entire mansion erupted into motion. Dominic appeared first, shouting orders as he called every guard to the surveillance room. Lucia sat frozen, her face drained of color. Vincent returned near noon, just as I stood in the living room trembling so hard I could barely breathe. He didn't ask me anything. He didn't need an explanation. He simply looked at me, and there are no words for that look. It was anguish without sound. Fury restrained so tightly it darkened the air around him. Vincent strode straight into the surveillance room and slammed his hand on the desk. "Show me the footage." They replayed everything from the moment Lily and Rosa moved out of the main camera's view, down the lavender path. A small black van, no license plates, stopped at the exact second a guard was distracted by an internal call. 2 men stepped out, seized Lily in less than 10 seconds, and disappeared toward the pine forest behind the estate. Dominic punched the wall, knuckles splitting open as blood seeped from the skin. I stood paralyzed, numbness spreading from my chest all the way to my fingertips. It had taken only minutes in which I wasn't watching her, minutes when I believed she was safe. Vincent turned to me and gripped my shoulders. His eyes were no longer cold, they were desperate, clinging to strength with every breath. I swear I will bring Lily back, at any cost. I don't remember whether I nodded or simply collapsed into him. I only remember that when he left with Marcus and 3 other men, climbing into a charcoal SUV, I stood there clutching the tiny handkerchief Lily had dropped on the garden bench. A cold wind swept through the trees, and I knew the peaceful world I thought I had found had shattered. Everything now was a race against time, against darkness, against the deepest fear a mother can carry. I sat, frozen in the library, Lily's handkerchief still clenched in my fist, my eyes locked on the phone Marcus had just handed me. A message had arrived from an unknown number, no text, only a video file. When I opened it, my heart plummeted. The first frame was Lily, her small hands lightly bound with cloth, sitting in an empty room with cold cement walls. She still wore the blue sweater I'd put on her that morning. Her hair was messy, but she wasn't hurt. Her eyes were wide with terror, tears shimmering as she tried to hold them back while staring toward the camera. A man's voice appeared off-screen, thick with a Russian accent, smooth and merciless. Lily will remain unharmed, if Vincent Moretti behaves. Then a sheet of paper was held up to the lens, written in dark, heavy strokes, 24 hours. Bring the transaction code from the Bellini account. No police, no Dominic, or we will return her to you in pieces. I covered my mouth to stop myself from screaming. Dominic snatched the phone, fury flashing in his eyes. It can't be them. They were driven out of Chicago 5 years ago. Marcus took the device and began tracing the signal. Lucia entered just as Vincent returned, dust and road grit still clinging to him, his rage barely constrained beneath the surface. When he saw me, he moved quickly, sitting beside me, watching every frame of the video. When it ended, silence swallowed the room. The ticking clock on the wall was the only reminder that time was slipping through our fingers. My voice cracked into a whisper. Who did this? Vincent looked up, his eyes darkened. Alexei Baranov, I stared, the name unfamiliar to me but clearly terrifying to him. Russian Mafia, Vincent said slowly, each word like a blade. He once controlled the western side of the city, until our family removed him after we signed a pact with the Bellini group. Alexei vanished, but it seems he only crawled into the shadows to wait. Dominic leaned against the wall, fists clenched. Is he back for money or revenge? Vincent didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to Marcus and gestured sharply. Check every recent transfer connected to Bellini, search the old warehouses, and find the leak. A sudden realization struck me, my voice trembling. This morning, the guard escorting Lily got a phone call. He stepped away right before she disappeared. Marcus nodded grimly. We have a mole. Lucia stood motionless, her eyes closing as though listening to something far beneath the surface. When she opened them, her voice was calm and cold. Alexei doesn't want money. He wants to show the city we've lost control. Vincent nodded, eyes still fixed on the phone. And he chose the one weakness I can't protect. I gripped his hand. Vincent, I don't care who you are or what you've done, but if this happened because of me, because of Lily, then Vincent cut me off, his voice low and firm. Don't ever think that. You didn't bring this here. They've been trying to break this family for years. Lily was simply the excuse. I looked into his eyes, red and raw but tearless. I knew he was punishing himself. I also knew that for Vincent, every battle could be solved by blood and silence, but not this one. Because this time, the victim was a child. My child, and she had become the fragile trust he had only just begun to allow himself to hold. Marcus returned nearly an hour later. The signal came from a mobile device near the abandoned warehouses in the South District. Alexei's old base. No security cameras, no streetlights. It's a dead zone. Vincent turned to me, and for the first time, he asked in a voice barely louder than a breath, yet steady as a vow. I will bring Lily back. Do you trust me? I nodded, though my throat burned. I had no other choice. And perhaps, just perhaps, I had never trusted anyone as much as I trusted Tim in that moment. I want to go with you, Vincent. I must have said those words at least 3 times within 5 minutes, each time with a different voice, pleading, angry, then hopeless. But he only looked at me, his eyes as unyielding as a stone wall. Emily, It's not that I doubt your strength. It's that I know I won't be able to think straight if you're in danger. I lost Sophia. I cannot lose Lily. Not like that." He turned away right after saying it, leaving me standing in the middle of the living room as if the air had been sucked out of the world. Dominic was the one who led me upstairs, 2 guards following close behind. The door was locked from the outside. No violence, no threats, but enough for me to understand they would not let me leave that room until this was over. I didn't scream or pound on the door. Instead, I stepped out onto the balcony, where I could see the front courtyard lit up as bright as day. 5 black SUVs were lined up. Vincent stood beside. Marcus, wearing a bulletproof vest, his head tilted slightly as he listened to a report from a silver-haired man who was likely the security chief. Dominic approached, placing a hand on Vincent's shoulder, not speaking, only nodding. Vincent turned and looked up toward the balcony where I stood. Our eyes met for a long, suffocating moment. No words were needed. I understood everything he could not say. The door closed behind me as he stepped into the car. The convoy rolled out in silence, leaving only the sound of tires whispering across the pavement. I sank into a chair, holding my head in my hands, feeling hollow. Lucia knocked a while later. She didn't enter. She simply left a cup of ginger tea on the table and a printed photograph from the set I had taken on her birthday. In the picture, Lily sat on the grass with Rosa leaning her head on Lily's shoulder, the 2 girls smiling as brightly as the last sunlight of autumn. I stared at that photograph for a very long time. Each passing second felt like another cut. I had never known helplessness like this. I once thought being a single mother was the hardest thing I would ever face, sleeping in my car, skipping meals so Lily could have enough milk. But at least, back then, I could hold her in my arms. Now she was somewhere out there, in the hands of men I had never seen, thrown into a war between men burdened with blood and the ghosts of their pasts. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. The room felt too tight, too silent. I walked to the balcony once more. The night wind was cold, carrying the damp scent of wild grass. Far in the distance, the sound of engines had already melted into the darkness, leaving a hollow space lodged in my chest. I could do nothing except hope. Hope that Vincent would keep his promise. That his heart, frozen after Sophia's death, had finally learned how to love again, not only with logic, but with every instinct of a man who had lost too much. And I, the nameless woman, who had come here only to take a few photographs, could do nothing else but wait, holding my breath through every passing minute. I did not know how the night would end. Only that when Vincent left, he hadn't taken the one weapon capable of cutting through the darkness, me. And in the silence, I began to pray. Not only for my daughter's safe return, but for the man who was risking his life to make it happen. The warehouse sat on the southern edge of the city, where asphalt roads gave way to dirt and gravel, and rusted fences surrounded industrial lots abandoned years ago. On a satellite map, it was nothing more than a gray speck between trees and scrapyards, but to Vincent, it was the clearest trace Alexei had ever left behind after each quiet but ruthless power play. The convoy stopped about 200 meters from the warehouse. Vincent stepped out first, crouching low in the darkness, his eyes fixed on the narrow path leading to the side door. Marcus clipped his earpiece into place and signaled for 2 men to split off and circle the right flank. No shouts, no alarms. They moved like phantoms, trained by years of unnamed missions in shadows no one ever acknowledged. Vincent carried no heavy weapons, only a handgun tucked behind his back and a small blade strapped to his leg. But in his eyes there was something more dangerous than any weapon. The silent resolve of a man who would kill anything that stood between him and the child he hadn't fathered, yet now held entirely in his heart. When the side door cracked open, the hinges squealed softly like a breath. The team divided into 3 groups and advanced. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp metal and rust. Old wooden crates were stacked like a maze, forming narrow corridors and sharp corners. Vincent halted when he heard a faint sound at the end of the hallway, a muffled, quivering cry. He knew instantly it was Lily. His whole body tightened like a drawn bow as he moved forward, each step placed so carefully you'd think the ground itself could betray him. Marcus counted down with his fingers 3, 2, 1. Then they surged forward. 2 guards by the door didn't even have time to react before they were subdued. The small room opened, and a beam of a flashlight fell on the corner where Lily was tied to an old chair. She flinched at the light, her eyes wide with terror, But the moment she saw Vincent, tears flooded her face, no words. Only Vincent's arms closing around her, his whole body trembling as he felt her warmth. He cut her loose and lifted her high against his chest, pressing her cheek to his shoulder as though letting go would cause the world to collapse. Marcus signaled for the team to withdraw, but at that moment gunfire erupted from the warehouse's left wing. Another team had engaged Alexei's men. The shots ricocheted off the rusted metal walls, flashing like lightning in the darkness. Vincent pulled Lily tight against him, shielding her completely. He ran through the corridor, each stride steady and fierce. One man lunged out to block him, but before the attacker could raise his weapon, Vincent struck a clean, brutal blow to his neck, dropping him without a sound. By the time they reached the vehicle, Marcus yanked the door open. Vincent placed Lily into Lucia's arms. She had been waiting in the back seat, her face taut with fear. Their eyes met in a single breath. No questions, no explanations. Everything was contained in the silent nod of a mother, seeing her granddaughter returned whole. Vincent climbed in beside Lily as the SUV sped away. His hand remained clenched on her small shoulder, his eyes unblinking. Lily pressed her face into his chest and whispered in a cracked voice, "I knew you would come." Vincent lowered his forehead to hers, unable to answer because he knew it wasn't only Lily he had saved. He had been saved too from a hollow space he believed would never be filled again. I don't remember how I made it out to the courtyard, only that my heart felt as if it were about to burst the moment I saw Vincent step out of the dark-colored SUV, with Lily curled in his arms like a small, frightened kitten, her face buried against his chest. I ran to them, almost collapsing before I gathered her into my arms, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the cold of her skin, the trembling breath still caught in her throat. The fear inside me broke open all at once, spilling into tears I couldn't contain. My entire body shook as I held her tight, terrified that if I loosened my grip even for a second, she would vanish from me again. Vincent said nothing. He simply stood there, and in his eyes I saw something I had never seen in him before, not the coldness of a man accustomed to loss, not the calm facade of someone who had learned to hide pain behind sharp angles, but a quiet ache, soothed at last, something too fragile to name, and yet deep enough to keep a person from ever turning away. I looked up at him, my eyes swollen, my voice raw. "Thank you." Vincent shook his head, his hand brushing gently against my shoulder. "Don't thank me for something I should have done long ago. I failed, Sophia. I will not fail, Lily." His words pierced me like a needle, painful, but also grounding. For so long I had believed I didn't need anyone, that if I just tried hard enough, the world would stop hurting me. But as I held Lily while Vincent's arms still trembled from everything he had just risked, I realized I had been wrong. No one survives on strength alone. No one can protect what they love most without letting someone else step inside the fragile space of their life. I carried Lily back to our room. She fell asleep almost instantly in my arms, as if my presence was the last thread tying her back to this world. I sat beside her for a long time, my eyes still damp as I smoothed her tangled hair. When I finally stepped outside, Vincent was leaning against the hallway wall, the soft light washing over his cheekbones. I walked toward him, not saying a word, and before I could think twice, I wrapped my arms around him. He froze for a moment, then slowly placed his hands on my shoulders, the embrace gentle yet firm enough for me to feel the rapid beat of his heart. I pressed my cheek to his chest, letting myself lean on someone without guilt for the first time in years. He had been there, without hesitation, without fear, without retreat. He had stepped into danger for a child who wasn't his, simply because I had once trusted the wrong person. And now, as I stood there with my daughter safe in my arms, I understood that what I saw in Vincent wasn't just a man shaped by darkness, but the only person patient enough to stand beside me, without expecting perfection, without trying to fix me, simply choosing to protect what I cherished most. I lifted my head and looked up at him, my eyes no longer doubtful. I don't know where this is going. I don't know what we are. But if you hadn't come tonight, I don't know what would have become of me. Vincent placed a hand on my cheek, his gaze softening. "I won't promise I'll never hurt you. But if you give me a chance, I promise you won't face anything alone again." For the first time in years, my heart stopped resisting. Perhaps it wasn't love, not yet, but it was trust. And for someone who had once been left standing alone in the rain, that was enough to begin again. The morning after Lily returned, The atmosphere inside the estate felt strangely heavy. Everyone tried to act as though things were normal, but every glance, every careful step carried something unspoken. Vincent left the room early. He didn't say much, just rested his hand on my shoulder before walking out. I knew his mind was working, but there was something simmering in his eyes, like embers waiting for air. Marcus came shortly after breakfast, carrying a USB drive. He didn't explain, just plugged it into the computer in the library and let Vincent read. I couldn't see what was on the screen, but as I watched Vincent's face, I knew something inside him had cracked, something he had worked for years to keep intact. He didn't explode, didn't shout, didn't destroy anything. He simply closed the laptop, his fingers whitening around the edge. I stepped into the room, standing behind him. "Vincent, what happened?" He turned, his voice hoarse. "Dominic. He's the one who leaked Lily's location." He paused, as if holding himself together by force. He didn't do it directly. But the man who took the bribe was someone Dominic handpicked, and communication was done through a secure channel only he has access to. My throat tightened. No. Why would he do that? Vincent looked at me, and his eyes weren't angry, they were wounded. Because of power. Because he thinks you and Lily are a weakness, something that makes me lose control. Alexei was waiting for a chance like this, and Dominic gave him the reason he needed. I stepped back, not out of fear, but because the ground beneath me suddenly felt uncertain. Lucia walked in at that moment. She looked at Vincent, then at me. She didn't speak right away, only sat down slowly, as if she had known this truth long before it surfaced. "He did the same thing to Sophia," she said quietly, gazing out the window. "When she wanted to leave the family, to pursue art, to love someone Dominic couldn't control, he cut her off. He pushed her toward the underworld, and when she died, he called it fate." Vincent sank into the chair, his head falling into his hands. He didn't cry, but his breathing filled the room, raw and heavy. Lucia continued, her voice steadier than I had ever heard it. This time, he went further. "And Vincent, if you don't stand up now, someone else will suffer next." I took Vincent's hand, refusing to let him slip into silence. "You have to do something. Not for me. For yourself. For Sophia. For Lily." He lifted his head, eyes filled with shadows and resolve. "Dominic is in his study." The study, once the symbolic heart of the Moretti Empire, was lined with portraits of ancestors, the dim yellow lamps casting a faint glow over aging leather, and the stale scent of old tobacco clinging to the air. Vincent walked in without knocking. Dominic looked up, his expression devoid of surprise. Vincent threw the USB onto the desk. "Do you have anything to say?" Dominic slowly closed the book in his hands, his voice calm enough to chill the blood. "You're being emotional. This isn't betrayal, it's strategy." Vincent's jaw clenched. "Delivering Lily to an enemy is strategy? You nearly got a child, killed your own family, and you dare call that strategy?" Dominic stood, his eyes darkening. "It was necessary to protect our name." "You're too weak. You let a woman cloud your judgment." Vincent stepped forward, his voice low and sharp as a blade. "If this name requires the blood of a child to survive, then it died a long time ago. I want no part of it." Dominic froze. Silence stretched between them like a vacuum. Then he turned away, his voice dropping into something cold and final. "Then you are no longer a Moretti." Vincent laughed softly, bitterly. "No, I never was." He stepped out of the room without looking back. And when the door shut behind him, it wasn't just the end of a lineage, it was the final crack of a dynasty built on blood, and the beginning of something new, something more human, no matter the cost of breaking it apart. News of Dominic's betrayal spread through the inner circle in less than a day, yet its impact traveled like a fracture cutting through the stone foundation of the Moretti family. Handshakes became tighter, conversations shorter, and in the eyes of those who once stood unwaveringly loyal, there remained only suspicion and wary calculation. Vincent did not make many appearances after confronting Dominic. He withdrew into the background, spending most of his time in the old library that once belonged to Sophia, where her unfinished paintings still lingered with the colors of memories. I didn't ask, nor did I push. I understood he was facing the greatest internal conflict of his life, how to preserve his honor without betraying his own blood. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep in my arms, Vincent knocked on my door. He stepped inside, his eyes shadowed, exhaustion carved into every line of his face, but his gaze no longer trembled. He had reached a decision. I sat up, accepting that gaze the way one listens to a final verdict. Dominic will not be killed. His voice was quiet, yet resolute. I've thought about this dozens of times. Killing him might soothe the fury for a moment, but then what? It would only turn me into a mirror of him. He spent his entire life believing fear was the only way to hold power. I choose something else. I nodded, saying nothing, though my eyes burned. Perhaps deep down, I had feared Vincent would choose the path of blood. But he didn't, and that made me trust him more than any vow ever could. The next morning, Vincent called for an internal meeting. In the familiar gray stone room where harsh decisions had once echoed, there was now only a heavy silence when he entered, followed by Marcus and the two closest members of the family. Dominic had been stripped of his authority. All assets under his name would be transferred to a separate investment trust. He would leave Chicago, permanently. No one was to contact him, nor was his name to be mentioned in any strategic discussion from that day on. Some reacted with surprise, others with disbelief. But Vincent didn't wait for responses. This is not punishment. This is the only way to preserve the Moretti name without spilling more blood. Lucia sat at the far end of the table, not shedding a single tear. She simply looked at her son and nodded slowly, like a final farewell that required no words. I stood just outside, behind the barely closed door, quietly witnessing the moment Vincent shortened the distance between darkness and light with the weight of his own pain. Dominic was escorted out of the estate later that afternoon. No ceremony, no farewell. Only a silver car quietly disappearing beyond the black iron gates. Vincent did not watch him go. He stood in the garden where Lily was playing with Rosa. When the car vanished from sight, I approached him. He didn't turn around, only spoke softly. That man taught me how to stare at an enemy without blinking. He also taught me never to forgive. But today I chose forgiveness, not because he deserves it, but because of Lily, because of you, because of Sophia, because of myself. I tightened my grip around his hand. Vincent, you did the right thing. You didn't lose your honor, you preserved the last piece of humanity still left in all of this. He turned toward me, his eyes lighter than I had seen them since. The first moment I watched him smile at Lily. Maybe. But doing the right thing doesn't make it easy. I understood. And I knew from that moment on, Vincent had stepped across a threshold no one had forced him to cross. He did not spare Dominic because he was incapable. He did so because he chose to begin again, building something new from that fracture, forging a different kind of Moretti, a different kind of Vincent, and a future that no longer required cruelty to survive. After the day Dominic left the estate, the atmosphere slowly softened, as though a violent storm had finally passed, leaving behind the gentle warmth of an early autumn morning. Vincent spent more time in the garden, where Lily often played with Rosa beneath the maple trees, where the quiet no longer carried fear, but children's laughter drifting between the branches. I often watched from a distance as he knelt to tie Lily's shoelaces, his expression tender whenever she wrapped her arms around his neck, or simply sat beside her without a word, as if their shared presence alone was enough. One afternoon, with golden sunset spilling across the backyard, Vincent found me in the small studio I had set up in an empty room near the library. He looked at the photographs pinned along the wall, pictures of Lily, of Lucia, of Vincent beside the little girl, moments neither posed nor polished, only honest truths captured in passing light. He stood silently for a long time before turning to me, his eyes carrying a question he wasn't yet ready to speak aloud. I stepped closer, gently. If you're thinking about the future, I don't have an answer yet, but if you're asking whether I'm still afraid of you, then I'm not. Vincent smiled, fleeting but enough to make my heart skip. He moved toward me, not rushed, not hesitant. When his hands came to rest on my shoulders, I didn't pull away. Not because I was ready for a new love, but because for the first time, I didn't feel the need to protect myself from him. He didn't apologize for the past. He didn't make empty promises. He was simply there, in front of me, with all his scars and silences. One night, after Lily had fallen asleep, I invited Vincent to the rooftop terrace where I often hid whenever the world felt too heavy. He brought 2 glasses of wine without asking what I wanted, simply knowing I needed something warm and quiet. We sat side by side, not too close, not far overlooking a city shimmering like 1,000 fallen stars. In that gentle darkness, I heard him speak, his voice low, drifting like wind. I once thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, trying to atone in silence. But then you came, not loud, not demanding. You were simply there, looking at me as if I might still be someone worth trusting. I turned toward him, the faint light softening his face. And in his eyes I saw none of the remnants of a powerful crime lord, only a man who had lost too much and was now trying to hold on to whatever remained with his bare hands. I placed my hand on the back of his. I once thought I could never love again, but maybe things that break aren't meant to return to their original form. Sometimes they only need to be pieced together with gentleness and patience. Vincent held my hand not tightly, just enough to let me know I was being held, being chosen. In that moment, without confessions or promises, a single truth settled quietly in my chest. I had begun to love him, not because he was Vincent Moretti, but because he was the only person who stepped into my damaged world without trying to fix it, choosing instead to simply stay. And that was the most precious thing I had ever been given. The meeting was scheduled for Friday, in an old stone building deep in the historic district near the eastern docks, where the gray-green water reflected the muted gold of ships moored along the pier. It was where the Bellini family had held every major negotiation for nearly 3 decades. A place no one outside the Mafia dared approach whenever word of a closed council was sent out. Vincent wore a charcoal overcoat and a black shirt without a tie, his presence radiating a quiet authority that needed no embellishment. I watched from the bedroom window as he left the estate, with Marcus and 2 of his closest guards, his expression unreadable, though his eyes resembled a placid lake before a storm so calm it was unsettling. I knew he had prepared for this meeting for days, not just with documents, plans, and the list of those permitted to speak, but with the steady resolve of a man ready to sacrifice whatever remained to carve out a new path for his family. By the time Vincent entered the meeting room, everyone had arrived. The Bellini family sat on the left, led by Lorenzo Bellini, a salt-haired man with a sharp smile and eyes that seemed to pierce through skin and bone. On the right were the representatives of the 3 remaining groups from the old pact, Russo, D'Angelo, and Gianni. No one smiled, no one shook hands. The air felt like gunpowder waiting for a spark. Lorenzo opened first, his voice deep and steady. "Vincent, we heard Dominic has been removed. What does that mean for the structure of the Moretti family?" Vincent did not evade. He no longer represents us. As of today, I am responsible for all decisions. Anyone who disagrees has left or will be removed from the system. A murmur rose from the Gianni table, but Lorenzo lifted a hand for silence. Then what is the purpose of today's meeting? Vincent leaned forward, his voice firm as stone. To re-establish order. We have allowed personal vendettas to cloud our collective interests. Dominic was wrong, but Alexei is the one who exploited that weakness to threaten all of us. He did not target only my family. If you think the Bellinis are safe, review your own history. Lorenzo frowned but did not argue. Vincent continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. We need a true alliance, not on paper, but in action. I propose forming a new council. Each family gets 1 seat. Voting power scales with influence, but no one has absolute veto. All major transactions must be documented and signed by 3 parties. We set boundaries, and if anyone crosses them, the entire alliance will act. A silence followed, thick and deliberate. Vittorio D'Angelo, thin and sharp-eyed like a green viper, spoke first. And if someone betrays the alliance? Vincent didn't hesitate. They will be exiled. No protection, no negotiation. Marcus distributed printed plans. Lorenzo took a copy, reading through each page. He didn't speak right away, merely lifted his gaze. And who will oversee this? Vincent allowed a faint smile. Not me. I nominate Marcus and Carla Russo as co-heads of the Oversight Council. Neither is the head of a family, neither has direct political incentives, and both are respected. Lorenzo set the documents down, folding his arms. I must admit, Vincent, you are no longer Dominic's shadow. You've just accomplished what he never could, bringing enemies to the same table without firing a single bullet. A ripple of nods spread across the room. After a brief discussion, the representatives signed the agreement. There was no applause, but the first handshake between Vincent and Lorenzo echoed like a final punctuation to an old era. When Vincent walked out of that room, he didn't look back. Because he knew what he had built was more than an alliance among men who lived in darkness. It was the framework for an entirely new world, one where honor no longer depended on bloodshed, and trust, once again, became the most valuable currency on the table. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the large glass windows of the Lake Forest estate, spilling across the pristine white walls and polished wooden floors, wrapping the entire space in a warmth that was both elegant and strangely tender. Nothing like what Emily once imagined life with the Moretti family would be. She stood by the window, looking out to the wide garden where Lily was running freely, laughing brightly. Her small hand tucked safely inside Lucia's, her soft silver hair glowing under the light. Her eyes filled with a love so gentle it made her look like a true grandmother. Emily felt an unfamiliar rhythm settle into her chest, a way of living she had never known, where worries about money, safety, work, or tomorrow seemed to dissolve into a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. She had thought long and hard about going back to her old life, about familiar streets and familiar people. But when she saw Lily happy in Lucia's arms, she understood her decision was already made. She would stay. She would build a new future not only for herself, but for her daughter. Vincent stood quietly beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His presence alone, the kind of steady, unwavering presence she had never known from any man, was enough to calm her heart. She turned to him and smiled softly, her resolve settling into place. The first thing she did was plan her photography studio in one of the side wings of the estate, where the natural light poured in from 3 directions, and the space was wide enough to house all her equipment: cameras, lenses, softboxes, and large backdrops. She began rearranging everything, decorating with some familiar old pieces and adding new ones, creating a space that felt both like a return and a beginning, her way of marking a new chapter. Lily watched her mother with fascination, occasionally jumping in to help fold colorful cloths before racing back to the window to call out to Lucia, her bright voice ringing through the room like a bell, filling it with warmth and laughter. Emily found herself overwhelmed, tears welling as relief and happiness pulsed through her chest. She remembered the long nights in the city, the hurried meals, the exhaustion of counting every dollar just to get by. Now, everything seemed to fall into place in a way she never dared to dream. Vincent walked slowly around the studio, watching how she chose each spot for her equipment, how she hung her photographs. His eyes shimmered with admiration. He offered suggestions, gentle and respectful, but always allowed her the freedom to decide. Emily felt trusted, truly trusted, and the warmth of that feeling settled deep in her heart. By late afternoon, when the golden light streamed into the room, Emily stood in the middle of her new studio, looking out toward the garden where Lily and Lucia played. She felt the pulse of a new life moving through the estate, soft, steady, full of promise. This wasn't just a workspace. It was a home, a place where Lily would grow, protected and loved. Staying was no longer just a choice. It was a commitment, a promise to her daughter, to herself, and yes, even to Vincent. When Lily ran in and hugged her tightly, Emily held her close, listening to her little heartbeat, breathing in her warmth. Every hardship, every fear, every lonely night suddenly felt like part of a long road that had led her here. Now was the time to live, to love, to build something real. That evening, the estate glowed under soft amber lights, casting warm reflections across the white walls. Emily stood on the balcony with Vincent, their fingers intertwined, gazing out at the shimmering lake under the moonlight. Her heart was full in a way she couldn't put into words. Vincent turned toward her, his voice deep and steady as he asked about their future, about what they wanted to build together, about the dreams that were no longer hers alone, but theirs and Lily's. Emily felt her heart tremble. She inhaled deeply, her eyes shining with resolve and love. She told him she loved him, loved the way he cared, protected, and respected her, loved the trust he gave her without asking for anything in return. She told him she chose to stay, chose him, chose Lily, chose this home as the place where real happiness could grow. Vincent smiled, his gaze drifting briefly to Lily, laughing with Lucia below, then back to Emily. His eyes softened with peace and joy, feelings he once believed he would never have again. Emily realized then that life doesn't always give us perfect choices, but it gives us chances, precious chances, to choose what matters most. Love, trust, protection, a place to call home. Their story, Emily, Vincent, and Lily, is a reminder that no matter how complicated life becomes, love and trust remain the compass that guides us toward true happiness. If this story touched your heart, Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss our daily heartwarming videos. Please like and share to spread these emotions to others. And we'd love to hear from you. Did this story resonate with your life? Did it feel real? Share your thoughts in the comments. We truly want to listen from the deepest part of your hearts. Thank you for being with us through this journey. Wishing everyone watching good health, joy, and peace every day. Goodbye, and see you in the next video where we continue exploring more touching, inspiring, and deeply human stories.